So today, what we're going to look at is mean absolute deviation, which is one way that we can compare two groups of data. So here we've got a couple sets of data. We're going to pretend that we have two different colors of flowers in our garden, the red flowers and the blue flowers, and we are going to compare the heights of those flowers. One way to do that would be to calculate the average or the mean of those heights. And in order to do that, we would need to add up the heights of each flower in each separate group. So the sum of the red flowers is 21 inches. The sum of the blue flowers is also 21 inches. We would then divide by the number of flowers in each group, which is 5 for the red flowers, bringing us to an average of 4.4 inches. It's also 5 for the blue flowers, so that would also give us an average of 4.4 inches. What that tells us is that the mean or the average of both groups of flowers is 4.4 inches as far as the height goes. Obviously, though, there is still a difference between the heights of the flowers. You can see that the red flowers are all very, very close to the mean, while the blue flowers' heights are a little bit more spread out. So to compare the spread of that data, we can use what's known as the mean absolute deviation. When we calculate the mean absolute deviation, our goal is to answer the question, on average, how far is each flower from the mean? In order to do this, the first step is to actually find the mean, which we've done for each of the groups of flowers. In this case, our means turned out to be exactly the same. Won't always happen that way. The second step will be to find the absolute value of the difference between each flower and the mean. Basically, what we're looking for is how far away from the average is each individual flower. And then we take those differences and we find the average or the mean of those each individual differences. So for the red flowers, this is how it would look. There are heights again. We know that the heights are 3 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, 6 inches, and 5 inches. So to calculate the mean, which we've already done, but I just want to show it again, we would add up those values, divide by 5, because there's 5 different flowers, and there's our mean of 4.4 inches. Now what we'll do is we'll calculate how far away each individual flower is from that mean of 4.4 inches. So for example, the first flower, the 3-inch flower, is 1.4 inches away from the mean, as is the second flower. The third flower is only 4/10 of an inch away from the mean. The next flower is 6/10 away from the mean. And finally, our last flower is 1.6 inches away from the mean. So those are all of our differences that we'll use, and we'll now find the average or the mean of those differences. So to do that, we would add up all of those differences. Again, divide by 5 because there's 5 flowers, and we get 0.88. So for the red flowers, the mean absolute deviation is 0.88, which tells us that on average, the red flowers are 0.88 inches away from the mean of 4.4. Alright, so to recap, when we're finding the mean absolute deviation, again, that tells us on average how far is each flower from the mean. For the red, it was 0.88. To do that, we'll calculate our mean, find the absolute value of the difference between each flower and the mean, and then finally average those differences. So obviously the blue flowers are a little bit more spread out. We had flowers of 3 inches, 9 inches, 3 inches, 5 inches, and 2 inches. So again, the first step would be to find the mean. We're just showing this step one more time. Add up all of those values, divide by 5 because there are 5 flowers, and we get 4.4 inches for the mean for the blue flowers, the same as for the red. So at this point, what we'll do is we'll calculate how far away each flower is from that mean. So for example, the 3-inch flower is 1.4 inches away from the mean. The 9-inch flower is 5.6 inches from the mean. The 3-inch flower is 1.4 inches from the mean. The 5-inch flower is 6/10 of an inch away from the mean. And finally, the 2-inch flower is 2.4 inches away from the mean. We'll now average all of those differences. So we will add those up, divide our sum by 5, and when we do that, we get 2.08, which tells us that for the blue flowers, the mean absolute deviation is 2.08 inches. To translate, in case someone didn't know what we meant by mean absolute deviation, on average, the blue flowers are 2.08 inches away from the mean of 4.4. So, to recap, in our comparison of the flowers, maybe the first thing that we would want to do is compare the averages. When we did that, we ended up with an average for both groups of flowers to be 4.4 inches. That doesn't tell the whole story though, because there's still an obvious difference in the heights of our two groups. So to do that, we calculated the mean absolute deviation. Our red flowers ended up having a mean absolute deviation of 0.88 inches, while the blue flowers had a mean absolute deviation of 2.08 inches, telling us that the red flowers' heights are much closer together. They're much closer to the mean than the blue flowers' heights, which were much more spread out, as we can pretty much tell by the picture.